"Stop that racket, you little pest," my brother Ethan's voice thundered, and his hand crashed across my 7-year-old daughter Sophie's face, the slap slicing through the Cape Cod air like a blade. I'm Claire Bennett, 32, a single mom who thought she knew her family. But nothing braced me for that betrayal, or the cold, mocking laughter from my parents that followed. The ocean's salt stung my nose as Sophie's wails broke my heart. And in that moment, everything I believed about family shattered. We were at my parents' grand estate on Cape Cod, gathered for their 40th wedding anniversary. Picture a mansion draped in ivy, champagne flutes sparkling, and a documentary crew weaving through the crowd, filming the Carter family's so-called legacy. It was supposed to be a celebration, but the air crackled with old grudges, every smile hiding a barb. My family was a polished facade, gleaming on the outside, rotting within. And Sophie, my fearless, joyful girl, had just walked into its jaws. Let me pull you into that weekend, where the waves roared and secrets festered. I almost didn't come. My instincts screamed to stay home, far from the Carter's poison. Growing up, I was the outcast, the one who never measured up. Ethan, my older brother, was their shining star, charismatic, cutthroat, always winning. My parents, Richard and Margaret, built their world around him, while I was left scraping for scraps of approval. When Ethan struck Sophie, it wasn't just her cheek that burned. It was every wound they'd ever dealt me, every time they'd tried to dim my light. Those documentary mics, tucked in the shadows, caught it all: Ethan's rage, my parents' cruelty. It was proof, raw and undeniable. But could I find the strength to wield it? I'm telling you this because I believe every child deserves to shine, free from fear. Have you ever had to choose between family ties and protecting someone you love? Share your story in the comments. And if you think kids should be safe to be themselves, hit that subscribe button. This is our story, a single earth-shaking moment that sparked a fight for justice. Stay with me, because what came next, it'll grip you to the core. My childhood was a tightrope, stretched over a pit of expectations I could never meet. The Carter family lived in a stately home in Wellesley, Massachusetts, with emerald lawns and gleaming chandeliers. But inside, it was a maze of judgment. My father, Richard, a retired lawyer with a stare that could freeze blood, set the rules. My mother, Margaret, glided through in silk scarves, her warmth reserved for those who obeyed. They had 2 kids, Ethan, their golden heir, and me, Claire, the misfit who dared to dream differently. I learned young to fade into the wallpaper. Ethan, 3 years my senior, was their pride star quarterback, debate team captain, a carbon copy of Richard's drive. At 17, he was landing internships and charming family friends, while I was sketching in the margins of my textbooks, labeled too emotional by Margaret's pursed lips. When I forgot my lines in a school play, Richard called it a disgrace. When Ethan crashed his car racing friends, Margaret cooed, "He's just spirited." I still hear Ethan's taunt at my 16th birthday, his voice low so only I could hear, "You'll never be enough, Claire." The room cheered for his toast, but I felt the cut. By 19, I was desperate for escape. Emerson College was my lifeline. And there I met Ryan, a soft-spoken journalism student who saw the Claire beneath the scars. We married at 22, too eager, too hungry for a family that felt whole. Sophie arrived 3 years later, a burst of light with my dark eyes and Ryan's crooked smile. Holding her, I vowed she'd always know her value. But our fairy tale frayed fast. Ryan's late nights grew frequent, his phone hiding messages from a coworker named Lisa. He confessed to an affair, and though we tried counseling, his heart had left. By Sophie's 5th birthday, we were done. I kept Ryan's betrayal from my parents, knowing they'd weaponize it. Sure enough, Margaret's voice dripped with blame over the phone. You must have driven him away. Claire, what did you expect? I bit back tears, pouring myself into Sophie and my job at Horizon Media, a Boston firm where I'd clawed my way to communications coordinator. The promotion helped, but rent and childcare stretched me thin. Sometimes I had to swallow my pride and ask Richard and Margaret for cash, a new tire, a school fee. Their checks came with sermons. If you'd followed Ethan's example, you wouldn't be in this mess. Ethan's life was a billboard of success. He'd soared to a top spot at First Coastal Bank, married Lauren, a poised gallery owner from old money, and lived in a sleek Boston penthouse. We're prioritizing our careers, he'd say, his tone implying my life was lesser. Richard and Margaret praised him endlessly, their voices sharp when I visited. Why can't you strive like your brother? I wanted Sophie to have grandparents, an uncle, even if it meant shielding her from their venom. I thought I could handle it, be her armor. But I was wrong. Some poisons seep through even the strongest defenses. When the Cape Cod invitation came, my gut churned. Sophie was ecstatic, babbling about painting the ocean and playing with her cousins. My friend Jessica saw through me. Claire, that family's a viper's nest. Why go? I brushed it off. It's 3 days. For Sophie's sake, I'll manage. But packing our bags, I felt like I was arming for battle. The Carters didn't welcome outsiders, they judged them. And Sophie, with her unbound joy, was about to face their fire. Our car rolled up the winding drive to my parents' Cape Cod mansion, its stone facade glowing against the Atlantic's blue. Sophie pressed her nose to the window, awestruck. Mom, it's huge. Can I paint the waves today? Her voice bubbled, untouched by the dread pooling in my chest. The estate was a masterpiece, ivy clinging to walls, verandas overlooking the sea, but to me, it was a gilded cage. I managed a smile. Let's say hi to everyone first. Sweetie. Then we'll plan. Margaret greeted us at the entrance, her silk blouse flawless, her eyes scanning my worn sundress before softening on Sophie. You made it. We were starting to worry. Her embrace was cool, her perfume sharp as a blade. Just a slow drive, I said, stepping into the grand foyer. Marble floors gleamed, vases overflowed with lilies, every inch screaming privilege. Richard lounged by a carved fireplace, debating stocks with my uncle, his glance at us brief, dismissive. A curt nod was his only welcome. Ethan and Lauren appeared from the sunroom, his stride confident, her smile polite but guarded. Ethan's grin was all teeth, no warmth. Well, Claire's back in the lion's den. And little Sophie, the budding Picasso. Sophie ducked behind me, clutching my hand. Hi, Uncle Ethan, she whispered. Lauren knelt, her voice kind. It's so nice to see you. Sophie, your cousins are on the lawn if you want to join them later. Sophie's eyes lit up. Can I? Mom, I nodded. Once we settle in, Ethan swirled his gin, his gaze sharp. Still playing assistant at that media shop. What's it called? Horizon something. I straightened. Communications coordinator. Promoted last month, actually. He chuckled, mock impressed. Cute. I just closed a 10-figure deal at First Coastal. Dad, told you about the stock options. Yet Richard's eyes gleamed, and he clapped Ethan's back. That's the Carter way, always ahead. I faded into the background, their voices drowning me out. The great hall thrummed with relatives' aunts, cousins, distant kin arranging charcuterie boards and refilling wine. Mark, my brother-in-law, tinkered with his documentary gear by the ocean view windows, mics clipped to vases for candid audio. He caught my eye, offering a wry smile. "Your dad's obsessed with Ethan's spotlight. I'm just trying to keep the lenses clean." I laughed faintly. Good luck capturing anything honest here. Our room was a narrow afterthought, its view blocked by a hedge. Sophie didn't mind, unpacking her watercolors with glee. "I'm gonna paint Grandma a big wave." My chest ached. Her openness was a target in this house. That sounds perfect. Honey, just wait for the right time to show it. Okay, that night, the undercurrents surged. At dinner, Richard quizzed Ethan on his latest triumphs, while Margaret tisked at my posture. "Sit up. Claire, you look so tired." Sophie sat with her cousins, who mocked her stories and ignored her questions. I saw her shrink, but she kept smiling, determined. Afterward, my Aunt Patricia cornered me. "Ethan says you're barely scraping by since Ryan left. We've got a clerk job at our firm if you're desperate." I forced a polite tone. "I'm good, thanks. I'm managing a team now at Horizon." She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Well, don't be too proud to ask for help." Later, tucking Sophie in, I found her quiet, her fingers twisting the blanket. "Sweetie, what's up?" She hesitated. "Cousin Ava said my paintings are dumb. And Uncle Ethan told me to be quieter." My blood boiled. The old Carter playbook at work. "Sophie, your paintings are magic, and your voice is a gift. Don't let anyone steal that." She nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. Lying awake, the sea's restless hum outside, I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't a reunion, it was a trial. Sophie's light was a challenge to their order, and Ethan's patience was a fraying thread. I'd come hoping for connection, but now I saw the truth: the Carters didn't embrace family. They consumed it. Dawn painted the Cape Cod sky in soft pinks, but the mansion's air was thick, like a storm waiting to break. Sophie woke with a quiet determination, her voice a whisper. "Mom, can I show my new painting at brunch? It's the best one yet." Her eyes held a fragile hope, bruised by yesterday's slights, but still burning. I hugged her tight. "You bet, sweetie. Let's make today yours." But my stomach churned. This house didn't reward boldness, it punished it. The dining hall was a showcase of excess, its mahogany table laden with smoked salmon, fresh berries, and flutes of sparkling wine. Richard presided at one end, scanning his tablet, while Margaret fluttered among the caterers, her orders sharp. Ethan and Lauren sat near, his hand drumming the table, her gaze distant. Relatives filled the room, their chatter a low hum, their eyes darting with unspoken rivalries. Mark's documentary mics glinted subtly, capturing every word for the Carter legacy. Sophie gripped her painting, a radiant blend of turquoise waves and golden sun. "I want to show Uncle Ethan," she said, her voice brave but small. I nodded, my pulse quickening. "Go for it." "Honey, I'm right here." She approached Ethan, holding up her artwork. "Look, Uncle Ethan, it's the ocean." He barely glanced, his lip curling. "That's loud. Why don't you sit down and stop showing off?" Sophie's face fell. But she tried again, turning to Margaret. "Grandma, do you like it?" Margaret's smile was thin. "It's very bright." "Sophie, maybe something simpler next time." I clenched my napkin, my voice low. "She's proud of it." "Mom, let her be." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "She's a bit uncontrolled. Claire, a firmer hand would help." Richard looked up, his tone flat. Kids need boundaries. You're too soft. Always have been. The words stung, but I held Ethan's gaze across the table. He smirked, sipping his mimosa, daring me to push back. At the kids' table, Sophie tried to join her cousin's game of charades, but they shut her out. "You're too loud," Ava snapped, rolling her eyes. Sophie's shoulders slumped, and she retreated to a corner, her painting clutched like a shield. I followed, kneeling beside her. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Her voice cracked. "They don't like me, Mom. Is my painting ugly?" My heart shattered. "No. Sophie, your painting is beautiful, bold. They're just jealous of your shine." As I led her back to our table, a glass shattered. Cousin Noah, 9, had knocked over his juice, the liquid pooling red across the cloth. Ethan's voice exploded. "What's wrong with you? Can't you watch what you're doing?" His fist slammed the table, making Noah flinch. Lauren murmured. "Ethan, it's fine." But he waved her off, his face flushed. "They need to learn." The room hushed, relatives exchanging nervous glances. My skin prickled. Ethan's rage wasn't just about Sophie, it was a wildfire, ready to burn anyone in its path. I guided Sophie to our room, her steps heavy. "Let's rest, okay? Just you and me." She nodded, her painting trembling in her hands. In the quiet, I sat on the bed, my mind racing. The Carters were a machine, grinding down anyone who dared to stand out. Sophie's art, her voice, they were threats to their control. Ethan's temper was a fuse, burning shorter by the hour. I'd come here chasing a dream of family, but now I saw it clear this wasn't a home. It was a battlefield, and Sophie was in the crossfire. The Cape Cod brunch dragged on, the dining hall's grandeur mocked by the tension crackling in the air. Crystal chandeliers gleamed, but the mood was dark, every laugh forced, every glance loaded. Sophie sat quietly at the kids' table, her painting hidden, her spirit dimmed by the morning's rejections. I watched her, my fork untouched, my chest tight. Ethan's outburst over the spilled juice still hung heavy, a warning of the storm in him. I should have packed our bags last night. I thought, but Sophie's longing for family had tethered me here. A choice I'd pay for dearly. Then, a spark. Sophie stood, her small frame trembling but defiant. She began to sing a song she'd made up about the sea, her voice pure, weaving tales of starfish and tides. It was her heart laid bare, a fragile gift to a room that didn't deserve it. For a fleeting moment, her melody softened the hall. A few relatives smiled, caught by her courage. Even the cousins paused, their smirks faltering. My eyes stung with pride. She was shining, despite them all. But Ethan's face twisted, his glass slamming down with a thud. "Shut that noise up!" he bellowed, lurching from his chair. The room froze, conversations dying mid-sentence. Sophie's song broke, her eyes wide with fear as Ethan charged toward her. I scrambled to my feet, my chair crashing back, but the distance was too great. Sophie looked up, her voice a whisper. "Uncle Ethan." His hand flew smack. The slap rang out, sharp as a gunshot, echoing off the high ceilings. Sophie stumbled, her tiny body reeling, her painting tumbling to the floor. The world stopped. A scarlet welt flared on her cheek, stark against her pale skin. Her lips quivered, tears spilling as she crumpled. Ethan towered over her, his voice venomous. "You and your mother both worthless, always making a spectacle." Richard's low laugh cut through the silence. About time she learned some manners. Margaret's giggle followed, brittle and cruel. Claire's never known how to keep her in line. I snapped free, sprinting to Sophie, my heart hammering. I gathered her in my arms, her sobs hot against my neck. Her cheek burned under my fingers, the mark a screaming betrayal. "How dare you?" I spat at Ethan, my voice raw. He leaned back, arms crossed, unmoved. "She's got to learn the world doesn't bow to her whining. You're the one who's failed her." Claire. His words were acid, but I barely heard them. Sophie's trembling was all that mattered. Richard folded his tablet, his tone bored. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Claire. "A quick correction builds grit. Ethan turned out strong because of it." Margaret nodded, her smile patronizing. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Dear, embarrassing?" My daughter was hurt, her confidence shattered. And they called it a lesson. I pressed Sophie closer, my rage a living thing. Then I saw Mark by his camera, his face ashen, his hands still. The documentary mics woven into the table settings, pinned to the drapes, had caught it all. The slaps crack, Ethan's venom, Richard's approval, Margaret's laughter. Every damning second, Ethan's gaze darted to Mark, his jaw tightening. He knew. I met his eyes, my voice low, lethal. "We're leaving. Nobody lays a hand on my daughter." "Nobody," Margaret scoffed, waving a manicured hand. It was hardly a swat. "Claire, don't be so theatrical." I turned Sophie, revealing the welt, now bruising. Margaret's eyes flickered, a crack in her composure. But she rallied. "She's fine. You're stirring up drama." Ethan stepped forward, his voice a snarl. "Keep your mouth shut, Claire, or you'll wish you had." I backed toward the exit, Sophie's weight grounding me. "Try me, Ethan," Richard's voice followed. Cold as steel. "Walk out, and you're cut off. No more money, no more help." The threat was a knife, aimed at my vulnerability, but it didn't land. "I don't need your chains," I said, my voice steady. Ethan's laugh was cruel. Scurrying off, as always, pathetic. I didn't flinch, my focus on Sophie's quiet whimpers as I carried her out. The hall's opulence fading behind us. Those mics held the truth, and I'd make sure it roared louder than their lies. I cradled Sophie in our dim guest room, her cheek still warm, the bruise a cruel stain on her innocence. Her tears had slowed, but her voice broke my heart. "Mommy, why was Uncle Ethan so mad did I sing bad?" Each word was a dagger. I stroked her hair, my voice firm. "You sang like an angel." "Sophie, Ethan was wrong. He doesn't get to hurt you." She curled closer, and I packed our bags, hands unsteady but driven. We weren't staying another minute in this viper's nest. A faint knock jolted me. "Who is it?" I stood between Sophie and the door. "Mark," came the low reply. I eased the door open. His eyes were haunted. The mics got everything. Claire, the slap, Ethan's rant, your parents' laughs. It's all recorded. He hesitated. "I can slip you a copy before they force me to wipe it." Hope flared, sharp and bright. "You'd risk that." He nodded. "It's assault, plain and simple. Meet me by your car in 10. I called Jessica, my words tumbling out. Ethan hit Sophie. "Jess." For singing. My parents just laughed. Her voice was steel. "Get to my place now. They don't get near you again." Sophie dozed off, worn out from crying, and I carried her downstairs, bags digging into my shoulder. Margaret blocked the foyer, her face a mask of disdain. Running off so soon, I stared her down. "You think I'd stay after Ethan attacked my daughter?" She flicked her wrist. It was a light tap. "You're making a fool of yourself." I angled Sophie, the bruise stark in the light. "This is your idea of light. Margaret's gaze wavered, but she doubled down. You're blowing this out of proportion. I shoved past, the door slamming shut. Mark waited by my car, shadowed by pines, and pressed a USB drive into my hand. It's crystal clear. Use it wisely, they'll come for you. I gripped it tight. I owe you. Mark. The drive to Jessica's was a blur. Sophie sleeping. The USB a weight in my pocket. At Jessica's, her hug was fierce. You're home now. You and Sophie are safe. That night, with Sophie tucked in, Jessica and I played the recording. Ethan's shout, the slap's sickening snap, his worthless sneer, Richard's chuckle, Margaret's giggle. It was a gut punch. Raw and vile. They're monsters, Jessica said, her voice low. I nodded, my resolve ironclad. They don't get to hide this. The next morning, I took Sophie to Dr. Nguyen, who cataloged the bruise and recommended therapy. She's showing trauma signs, he said softly. Fear of loud voices, clinginess. A specialist will guide her. I met my lawyer friend, Rachel, and shared the audio. This is explosive, she said. Criminal charges might stick, but public exposure. That's your weapon. I leaned forward. Not about lawsuits. I want Ethan to face what he did. Her words lit a fuse. Ethan's bank, First Coastal, had a rigid ethics code, and he served on a children's charity board. I clipped the audio to its core. The slap, his cruelty, my parents' complicity, no edits, just truth. Then, I sent it to First Coastal's board, the Children's Hope Foundation, and the Boston Youth Mentorship Program. My message was measured, given Ethan Carter's public roles. I'm compelled to share this incident for the safety of others. Ethan's texts hit like a storm. You ruined me. The bank's investigating. Tell them it's a lie. I blocked him. Richard's messages were icy. You've disgraced this family. Margaret's pleading. We can fix this. Claire, call me. I shut them out. Within days. First Coastal suspended Ethan. The charity ousted him, and the mentorship program cut ties. Then came a bombshell. The bank's probe uncovered Ethan's pattern of workplace intimidation, screaming at staff, threatening firings. His empire was collapsing. Sophie's therapy sessions revealed her diary. Pages of feelings poured out. I wrote about the waves, she said, a shy smile breaking through. Her words inspired me. I launched Voices Unsilenced, a campaign to shield kids from family abuse, rooted in Sophie's courage. It caught fire online, survivors and parents rallying behind us. Ethan's world burned, but Sophie's voice soared. This wasn't revenge, it was justice, and we were just beginning. Sophie's giggles echoed through our Boston apartment, a melody I'd once feared lost. Months after the Cape Cod nightmare, her light was flickering back, like stars breaking through a storm. Therapy with Dr. Ellis, a warm child psychologist, was rebuilding her strength. Sophie's a fighter, Dr. Ellis said, her eyes kind, her diaries a safe space for her pain, and your fierce love is her anchor. I nodded, guilt still gnawing. I hadn't blocked Ethan's hand, but I'd guard her heart now. Sophie joined a local art studio, her canvases bursting with wild greens and blazing oranges. One evening, she unveiled a painting of a sailboat braving a tempest. It's us. Mom, she said, her smile bold. We're stronger than the waves. My eyes stung. Her faith in me was a fire, warming the places my family had left cold. At the studio's spring showcase, her sailboat hung proudly, drawing whispers of awe. Sophie stood tall, soaking in the praise, her confidence blooming anew. Voices Unsilenced, my campaign sparked by Sophie's diary, was a wildfire. Her words, shared with her blessing, moved thousands online parents, survivors, advocates uniting to break cycles of abuse. A Boston council meeting, fueled by our push, passed a new policy tightening safeguards for kids in family conflicts. Every message from strangers, thanking us for their courage to speak, felt like a step toward healing not just for Sophie, but for me. Ethan's world, meanwhile, lay in ruins. First Coastal Bank shoved him into a low-level desk job. His executive halo shattered. The Children's Hope Foundation's blunt statement stung. We prioritize child safety above all. His mentorship program ties were cut. Lauren walked away, filing for separation after a raw lunch with me. Hearing Ethan on that tape, she said, twisting her napkin. It was like seeing my future. The shouting, the smashed plates. I'm done. I touched her arm. You're free now. She gave a shaky nod. I wish I'd acted sooner. My parents reached out. Their attempts, awkward, self-serving. Margaret sent a text about missing Sophie, sidestepping Ethan's violence. Richard's email framed it as a family hiccup. I drew a hard line. No access to Sophie without real accountability. In therapy, Richard muttered. I didn't stop Ethan. That was a mistake, Margaret choked out. I thought I was keeping us together. I held firm. Together doesn't mean excusing harm. Progress was slow, their pride a heavy chain. At Horizon Media, my resolve found new ground. A senior project manager role opened, and though I felt out of my depth, I went for it. My boss, Grace, saw the shift in me. Your clarity under pressure, your integrity. Its leadership. The promotion, with its steady paycheck, cut the last tether to my parents' money. I walked taller, my voice sharp and sure, no longer the Claire who flinched at their scorn. Mark called one night, his tone hushed. Cousins and aunts, they've seen Ethan's anger before. Bullying kids at reunions. They're with you now. Claire, the family fractured, loyalty shifting to truth over blood. My Aunt Clara, Richard's sister, called. Her voice heavy. I saw Ethan shove a cousin years ago. I stayed quiet. You're doing what I couldn't. Her confession, and others, wove a new circle family not by birth, but by shared values. Sophie's healing was my North Star. Dr. Ellis scaled back our sessions, noting her growing ease. She sang her ocean song again, first in whispers, then with gusto, filling our home with life. One night, she hugged me tight. I'm not afraid anymore. Mom, my song's mine. Tears fell as I held her. She was rising, and so was I. Ethan's slap meant to crush us, but it forged a strength no one could break. We weren't just surviving, we were rewriting our story. 8 months after Ethan's slap tore through our lives, I leaned against the railing of our Boston apartment's balcony, the city's lights twinkling like hope in the dusk. Inside, Sophie slept, her latest painting a soaring gull over a turbulent sea propped by her bed. Our small home, once a reminder of scraped-together days, was now a haven of color and song. Voices Unsilenced had blossomed into a non-profit. Sophie's diary entries its heartbeat, inspiring families nationwide to protect their kids' spirits. I wasn't the Claire who cowered in the Carter family's shadow anymore. I was a mother, a fighter, a voice. That moment in Cape Cod, when Ethan's hand struck Sophie, didn't just bruise her cheek, it shattered the lies I'd lived under. My parents' laughter, their casual dismissal, laid bare their truth. But from that pain came clarity, a fire I didn't know I had. I'd spent years shrinking, pleasing, apologizing. No more. Sophie's courage, her refusal to stay silent, showed me the way. This journey carved out lessons I'll hold tight forever. First, defend your truth. Family can chain you to silence. But speaking out, even when your voice shakes, breaks those bonds. Truth is freedom. Second, kids' spirits are sacred. Sophie's song, her art, they're her essence, not a flaw to be fixed. We owe children space to shine, not cages to fit our rules. Third, courage is action. Strength isn't fearless. It's pushing forward, heart pounding, to do what's right, sending that recording, building the campaign, drawing lines with my parents. Those choices built a new me. One bright afternoon, Sophie led a mural project at the community center for Voices Unsilenced, her laughter guiding other kids as they painted waves and skies. Margaret came, her presence tentative after months of therapy and halting apologies. She watched Sophie, her eyes misty, her voice. "It's so strong," she said softly. "I failed her that day. I met her gaze." "You did. But you can choose better now." It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall. This path isn't done. There'll be more tough talks, more boundaries to guard, more healing for Sophie and me. But we walk it together, her hand in mine, our future unshackled. Ethan tried to dim a child's light. Instead, he ignited a blaze that exposed decades of buried truths. Have you ever had to break family ties to protect someone you love? Share your story below. I read them all. If Sophie's courage moved you, hit that subscribe button for more stories of rising above. Your voice, like hers, belongs in the light, fearless, unashamed. Thank you for sharing our fight.